Hi guys, welcome back to the Tech Chat. Now, buying a new monitor can be a bit tricky. There's loads of things to consider, whether it's the size and resolution, the type of panel used, refresh rates, response times, adaptive sync technologies, ports. What if you want to use the monitor with a games console, or maybe you've been eyeing up one of these fancy ultra-wide monitors, or perhaps you're wondering if you should invest in a 4K monitor. It can all be a bit overwhelming. You can of course just type into Amazon something like 24-inch gaming monitor, filter it by customer rating, and then buy one that looks nice and that's within your budget. That's one way of doing it, but even a basic monitor will set you back £100, $150. So before you go and buy one and spend your hard-earned money, just give me a few minutes and I'll run you through everything you need to know about buying the right monitor for you, and I put links to my favorite recommended monitors in the description below this video.
Jeez, you believe that guy? I hate these snobs.
So let's kick off with the most important stuff, size and resolution. You can get monitors in all sorts of sizes from 17 to 40 inches. The most common size is 24 inches and it's big enough to make a useful second screen if your main computer is a laptop, and it's popular enough that there are loads to choose from and they're usually pretty cheap. Now, the vast majority of 24-inch monitors have a resolution of 1920 by 1080, also known as Full HD, which is the same resolution as most TVs. The next size up is 27 inches, which is becoming much more common and popular with gamers and power users who want the extra screen real estate. Now, if you get a 27-inch monitor with the same 1080p resolution, everything starts to get a little bit blurry or less sharp because the pixels are bigger, so the pixel per inch density is lower. In my experience, if you want a 27-inch monitor, I would definitely recommend getting one with a 2560 by 1440 resolution, also known as Quad HD. Unless you're a casual user who just wants something cheap and basic, I'd say a 27-inch 1440p, in my opinion, is the perfect monitor and resolution combination right now, but it does add to the price. But what about 4K and ultra-wide monitors like this one? Well, you can get 4K or 3840 by 2160 monitors as small as 24 inches, but the most popular size is 27 inches. Still though, I don't think 27 inches is big enough to really take advantage of all those extra pixels. And things like text and icons will start to look smaller. You can of course make them bigger using scaling in Windows and Mac, but it doesn't work well for everything. I would say if you really want a 4K monitor, get at least a 30-inch or bigger one. I think that'd be the best suited to that sort of high resolution, and you can really then take advantage of all that extra detail, all those extra pixels. I've talked about 4K monitors quite a bit in other videos, but what exactly is the benefit of getting a 4K monitor? I mean, everyone's talking about 4K TVs and 4K Blu-rays and the next generation of consoles supporting possibly 4K gaming and at least having UHD players. So what's the point in getting a 4K monitor? Well, basically they have 8 million pixels. That's 4 times as many compared to a normal Full HD monitor. And what that means is everything's sharper, clearer, and generally appears more detailed. But the problem is, pushing 4 times as many pixels means you need a much faster computer to power it, especially if you're gaming. If you up the resolution to 4K, it will have a massive impact on your frame rate in games. And in all honesty, I wouldn't recommend 4K monitors to the vast majority of people out there, not yet at least, unless you have a beast of a PC with the likes of an NVIDIA 1080 graphics card. You won't get a consistent 60 FPS in modern games at high settings. So for gamers, stick to a 24 or 27-inch monitor with a 1080p or 1440p resolution respectively. However, if you're a creative professional, maybe a developer, someone who really wants a big monitor but wants to keep it looking sharp, a 4K is a good choice, and there are good 4K monitors getting more affordable, but do just make sure your PC is powerful enough to run it, and crucially has the right ports, but we'll talk about more about that later on. Now finally, in terms of sizes, let's talk about ultra-wide monitors. Where most monitors and TVs have a 16:9 aspect ratio, ultra-wides like this one have a 21:9 aspect ratio. So they're not any taller, they're just a lot wider. This is great for watching movies, having multiple programs open at once, and playing games. It really adds to the immersion. The most common sizes of ultra-wides are 29 and 34 inches, with resolutions of 2560 by 1080 and 3440 by 1440 respectively. There is definitely a price premium to be had with ultra-wides, but they do look great, I think you'll agree. They look really futuristic, something out of Minority Report perhaps. And they're a good alternative to having a multiple monitor setup, rather than having 2 monitors here with a bezel in the middle you have to try and hide. This looks much nicer. But you don't have to break the bank to get one. There are some good value ones out there, but if you want a bigger one like this 34-inch one, one with a higher 3440 by 1440 resolution, and extras like G-Sync, which we'll talk about later on, you are going to pay quite a bit more for it. And also, getting one curved is going to add to the price. Now, in terms of design and style, well, it's all very subjective, isn't it? I tend to prefer monitors with really thin bezels. It's really up to you what they look like. The one thing that is probably worth mentioning about the design is how flexible they are, how much you can move them around. Some monitors can be tilted, raised, lowered, swiveled, and rotated 90 degrees so you can use them vertically, and even VESA mounted if you want to take the stand off and mount it to your desk or the wall. Other ones don't move at all. So if you're someone who wants to move it around a lot, if you've got a weird shaped desk or you want to rotate it 90 degrees, look at the product description to see just how flexible it is. Now let's talk about panels. That sounds really boring, I know, but it is pretty important and makes a big difference to how good your monitor looks. There are three types: IPS, TN and VA, with the first two being the most common. If you want to know all there is to know about TN versus IPS, you can check out my in-depth comparison video by clicking on the card at the top right. But generally, TN panels are cheaper and they offer better response time, so you don't get as much ghosting effects when playing games or watching fast-moving content, but they do generally have pretty rubbish viewing angles. IPS, on the other hand, is more expensive, has slightly slower response times, and depending on the quality, might suffer from IPS glow. But despite all that, they're a lot more color accurate, they have fantastic viewing angles, and generally, and also in my opinion, they are the preferred panel to go for. Similarly, VA panels, they are very similar to IPS. They tend to offer better contrast ratios, so you get deeper blacks, richer whites, slightly more vibrant colors, but they tend not to have as quite good a viewing angles as IPS. So, unless you're a professional gamer who wants the absolute fastest response time, the lowest input lag, which is something different, and I do discuss in that IPS versus TN video, perhaps you can forego the good viewing angles and go for a TN panel. However, if you're a general user, if you're a photo editor, if you value color accuracy, definitely try and pay the extra to get an IPS or a VA panel. IPS is the most popular, most common after TN. VA is usually just restricted to Samsung monitors. There's nothing wrong with them, but again, you might not want a Samsung monitor. It might not have the features you want. So this one I have here is IPS, and I really do swear up by IPS. And if you get a good one, their input lags and response times can be pretty much as low as a TN now anyway. The technology is getting a lot better. Next up are refresh rates. This is the number of times your panel refreshes per second. The more often it does, the smoother everything looks. The vast majority of monitors, including this one, have a 60 Hz refresh rate, but more and more these days monitors are offering higher refresh rates, anything from 75 to 200 Hz. A high refresh rate is a really nice feature to have, but anything above 120 Hz, you'll struggle to notice the difference. However, jumping from 60 to 100 or 120 will offer a big difference. Games will feel slicker and smoother, moving the mouse around the desktop will suddenly become a nicer experience. Some people, especially gamers, swear by a high refresh rate monitor. In my opinion though, having used a variety of them, I actually decided to stick with an ultra-wide monitor which has a basic 60 Hz refresh rate rather than a typical 16:9 one with a higher refresh rate, mainly because I don't play games as much these days, and that's one of the main reasons you would want one. It is worth mentioning though that in games you'll only see the benefit of high refresh rates if your PC is fast enough to push the games above 60 frames per second. If you have an average PC and you only get 30 to 40 FPS in games, you're not going to be taking advantage of that 120 Hz monitor, for gaming at least, so it won't really be any use to you. High refresh rate monitors do definitely cost more, but it is a really nice feature to have. I do recommend it if you can afford it. You don't have to have it, as I say, I've chosen not to in favor of an ultra-wide, but hopefully something in the future I can afford an ultra-wide with a high refresh rate. It is definitely something I would like. It's not essential, but it is a pretty cool feature. Now, a quick mention about ports. I know it's boring, but there are just two kinds of ports on modern monitors that you need to worry about: HDMI and DisplayPort. Older monitors have VGA and DVI ports, but considering this is a 2016 video, and I guess you guys are watching this because you are interested in buying a new monitor, I'm not going to worry about all those old ports. So, HDMI and DisplayPort. Currently, the vast majority of monitors have a HDMI 1.4 port and or a DisplayPort 1.2. That's great, nothing really to worry about there. But if you want a 4K monitor, you need to make sure both the monitor and the graphics card in your computer support the newer HDMI 2.0 connection, otherwise you'll be limited to just 30 Hz at 4K, which will make your computer feel really slow. DisplayPort 1.2, on the other hand, is capable of 4K at 60 Hz, so that's the best way of doing 4K right now. At 1440p, you can only get 60 Hz over HDMI 1.4, so again, DisplayPort 1.2 is your best bet, unless of course your monitor and your graphics card support HDMI 2.0, but that is a bit rarer right now. So the moral of the story is, where possible, use a DisplayPort 1.2 connection, but HDMI is fine for 1080p or 1440p resolutions as long as you're not running a high refresh monitor. Now DisplayPorts 1.3 and 1.4 and HDMI 2.0B are all sort of coming out now in the new graphics cards like the NVIDIA GTX 1070, 1080 and the AMD RX 480. So if you're building a new rig and you're looking to future-proof, you're perhaps not sure what monitor you want, but you might want the potential of having a 4K or an ultra-wide high refresh monitor, do try and get one of these newer cards, because you'll thank yourself later that you've got these brand new connections on them. Now moving on from ports, you'll be glad to hear, to another feature you might be interested in, particularly if you're a big gamer, is G-Sync or FreeSync. These are what are called adaptive sync technologies from NVIDIA and AMD respectively. Basically they work by making sure your graphics card and your monitor refresh at the same time, so it reduces screen tearing, gets rid of some stuttering and reduces input lag, which makes your games look and feel smoother. I wouldn't say it's as big or an as important feature as getting a monitor with a high refresh rate in my opinion, but if you want the best gaming experience, a G-Sync or FreeSync monitor is a great idea. G-Sync in particular does add quite a bit to the cost of a monitor, and of course can only be used with an NVIDIA graphics card, whereas FreeSync tends to be quite a lot cheaper, but again could only be used with AMD cards. Now I hope I haven't bored you guys too much just yet, but I want to mention a couple of more features just quickly. One of them is ultra low motion blur, or ULMB, and the other is overdrive. ULMB, as it says on the tin, reduces motion blur, and it works quite well, but the problem is it reduces the monitor's brightness by often up to 50–60%. So I'm not really a fan of using it, even though it makes things a bit smoother. The other feature I also don't really use is overdrive, which artificially lowers response times, which reduces ghosting, but at the same time it does increase input lag, which is the time between, say, clicking the mouse and the gun firing in your game on the computer. So ULMB and overdrive are often built into monitors. They're quite common, but you might want to have a play around whether you want to use them or not, but generally there's just too many issues with them that I personally wouldn't use them. Again, if you have G-Sync and FreeSync, that's better than ULMB. And overdrive, well, just make sure you can either put it on medium, don't ever put it on high or very high, you get weird artifacting, but generally just keep it off. It's not something I would really recommend. It's not a game-changing feature. One of the questions I do get asked quite a lot is, what's the best monitor for games consoles? Well, PS4 and Xbox One currently have a maximum output of 1080p at 60Hz. So a 4K monitor is pretty pointless at the moment. If you're tempted by an ultra-wide monitor for console gaming, again, most consoles games just output at 16:9 aspect ratio, so you're going to have letterboxing on the side of the monitors. The odd game will stretch, but it won't look good, so ultra-wide monitors aren't really ideal for console gaming. They work, but you'll have letterboxing most of the time. As for the next generation of consoles like the PS4 Neo, whatever it's going to be called, Xbox One S and Project Scorpio, it might be worth investing in a 4K monitor to take advantage of their Ultra HD Blu-ray players and potentially their 4K gaming output, but I wouldn't really worry about that too much now. Maybe look at buying a 4K monitor in a year or so, perhaps mid to late 2017, when the consoles are out, when these monitors are cheaper, they have more features, but for now I wouldn't really bother with 4K for gaming. Generally, a good 24-inch 1080p monitor would be best for gaming, because as I say, as soon as you go to 27 inches and above, you do lose the quality. However, if you're going to sit further away like people often do when they play console games, you could get away with a 27-inch monitor. Now, what would be the perfect monitor? For some, an ultra-wide like this, it doesn't have all the bells and whistles, this doesn't have G-Sync or a high refresh rate, but I really do appreciate the wide angle. For many of you though, a solid 27-inch 1440p IPS high refresh rate G-Sync monitor would be the ideal, the perfect monitor, but you are going to pay for those features. You're looking at about £600 or $800 for a monitor like that. All of these features don't come cheap. Alternatively, you may want a 4K monitor, perhaps a 32-inch one. You don't care about G-Sync, so that saves on some money. But again, 4K still does have a bit of a premium over the lower resolutions, so it really does come down to what you're going to use it for and how much you're willing to pay. So I do appreciate that is quite a lot to take in, but I hope this video has helped you decide what sort of monitor you'd want to buy, or perhaps just cleared up a few things for you. I have put a link, as I say, below this video in the description to a few of my favourite monitors, including this one I'm using right now. But if I have missed out anything, or you don't agree with something I've said, do let me know in the comments below. It would be great to hear your thoughts, or tweet me at the Tech Chat. Thank you very much for watching, guys, and I'll see you again right here on the Tech Chat.